Hello and welcome to this podcast. Now, if you've been following the podcast and particularly the last few episodes, I've been taking you through how deals can really be lost early on. And the truth of all of this, and hopefully this has come across, is that most deals aren't lost at the end. They're lost pretty much in the first conversation, and that's the subject of this podcast. So you may well have had the experience, and maybe this is why you're listening to this podcast, that you had a deal that was looking perfect. The client requirements were exactly what you offered. They were a perfect fit for your solution. Everything seemed to be going well. And then they went and bought from somebody else. And often this comes down to the very first conversation, where you can call that a discovery call or qualification call, whatever term you use. But if you get that wrong, you make it really hard to then pull the thing back. And one of the reasons for that is that you can be really trying to sell the wrong thing. You're not solving the right problem for this particular client. And this is the most important thing to remember, that we as salespeople are problem solvers. And this is a really important distinction. And if you haven't approached sales that way, I really suggest you at least give it a try. So what we're going to do in this podcast is just take a look at what weak discovery actually looks like. So this will start with questions tend to be very surface level. So what I mean by that, you're asking questions along the lines of, what are you looking for? Or what's your budget? Typically, salespeople who are not successful, I'm going to be kind, tend to talk a lot. They start pitching way too early. They have no emotional insight into what's driving this conversation, particularly if this is somebody who's called you, or has prompted the contact. If the initial contact came from the client, you have to understand that they have reached a level of pain with the problem that they are trying to solve that has moved them to action. And the other thing to remember is that whether you're selling business to business or business to consumer, most people won't take action. Now, I'm talking broadly across most industries. It's not always true, but broadly speaking, most people will put time aside to talk to a salesperson when the level of pain they're experiencing around this issue has reached a certain level. So and if you think of your own situation where you've had to buy things, it may be you've been putting things off for a while. And then finally, you've just reached a point where you can't carry on with that situation any further. So you now need to go and find a solution. And this is exactly what's happening when somebody comes to you. If the conversation has gone the other way, this is somebody who you've approached, then the level of urgency might be lower. But this is where having the right conversation early on can start to uncover whether there's a real need and whether there, more importantly, a driving need to push forward with a solution. So these are really important. And these things are absolutely vital that you get in your initial conversations, because if you don't, then it's going to be hard work. The sales cycle is likely to extend, and you leave yourself open to a competitor coming in and taking the deal. So if you are in that initial discovery call, be very conscious and maybe do a quick inventory now or after this podcast to write down the kind of questions you're asking. And if they're at the level of what are you looking for, what's your budget, all that kind of stuff, then I suggest a rethink, and I suggest that you listen to the rest of this podcast for one thing. So to just recap that, you're asking surface level questions, you're over talking, you're pitching too early. There's no emotional insight. You're only looking at the facts, but you're not looking at what the emotional drivers are. And remember, most people, particularly in business to consumer, but also in business to business, there will be an emotional element to that decision. And if you haven't covered that off, if you don't understand what that is, then you do leave yourself vulnerable in terms of closing that sale. And then finally, you need a clear definition of what the problem is, so that you know what the problem is you're actually solving, if you don't have a clear understanding of that, then you really are in the dark. So the important thing to remember here is that if you don't deeply understand the problem, you're just guessing your way to a sale. Your half of it is hoping that you're going to get lucky and just hit on the right point that will turn the sale in your favor. Okay, so what happens when discovery is weak, when you make all these mistakes? So first of all, you start selling the wrong thing. So your solution isn't matched to solving their specific problem, or at least the key problem, the most important problem. There's also no urgency. So if you don't understand what the pain is, why should that person act? As I've already said, we tend to put things off until we have to do them. So it's really important as a salesperson that what you do is you understand what that driver is, because you're there to solve a problem for the client. But some clients need a little bit of help actually taking that action. They'll kind of wait, maybe even until it's too late, or the cost of delaying starts to really increase, whether that's a financial cost or some other cost. So it's really important that you understand where you can apply a sense of urgency to get the client to take action. Thirdly, with weak differentiation, so in other words, you haven't got to the heart of what the problem is, you're just like every other salesperson they're speaking to. So they're skating on the surface. From a client's perspective, there's no real interest in solving their problem. It's more about just selling another whatever it is you sell and then moving on to the next client. So again, putting yourself in the client's shoes, why would you go with that salesperson over another one if they're just as disinterested as everybody else? So it's very, very weak. And the key thing here, and I've spoken about this in other podcasts, is that why most deals are won after the meeting. So last time I spoke about how this happens, that you don't actually win the deal at the meeting, it's what happens afterwards. But you win most deals, or why most deals are won after the meeting is only true, or you only get there if your discovery is strong. So in other words, the solution you're providing absolutely hits those pain points and provides a solution to them. And that's clearly communicated to the decision makers. Right, so having spoken about all of that, let's dive in a little bit deeper. And there are 4 levels, basically, of what the discovery call should be meeting or hitting. So the first one is the facts. So what's the current situation? What's the current setup? And what are the metrics that are being applied? So these can be the metrics that are defining the problem. They can be the metrics that are defining the solution. But what are the metrics you need to be able to measure up against, that you need to meet? So that's the first step, looking at the facts. Level 2 is starting to get down to the problem. So what is not working? Really, what is driving this whole situation? Why can't they carry on the way that they are? So it's really, really important to, first of all, identify the problem, and then at the next level, look at the impact that problem is having. So in other words, what is this costing them? Is the cost measured in terms of time? Is it money? Is it stress? Is it missed opportunities? If you're selling to consumers, it could be self-image, things like that. If you're selling fitness, for example, and somebody wants to lose weight, there might be concerns about health, having better health. What's the result of that? Well, they can be more active, maybe with their family, if they're older, with children or grandchildren, whatever it might be. So it's really, really important that you get clear on the impact and you spend time really uncovering that. And then finally, level 4 is emotion. And this is the real game changer, because up to this point, while you are identifying facts, you're identifying the key metrics here, but they're just facts, they're numbers, they're statements, they're aspirations maybe. But once you start getting into the emotion of it, and by that I mean it might be the frustration they're feeling, there might be pressure, they're feeling from, if it's, again, if it's a health thing, it might be doctor, family, whatever it might be, or the fear of loss. The fear is an important one, or it could be ambition. They want to move their career forward. So conversation around this is really important because these are the hooks where the real sale is made. Because if you identify, for example, that providing a particular solution to a problem will help somebody advance their career, and they're clearly quite ambitious and they want to move on, and they want to be able to demonstrate a track record of solving problems, of improving processes, improving efficiency, whatever it might be, it's really, really important that you start to understand that, because then you can really align your offer to the emotional outcomes, the emotional goals of what that person is trying to achieve with this purchase. So remember, facts inform decisions, but emotion drives them, and it's really important to understand where the drivers are. So I'm going to give you just a few questions you can ask that will help you along here. Now, as I hope you know, or if you've looked at the website, in fact, there's a free webinar that will take you through some of this process anyway, and that's just a 45-minute webinar that you just jump onto and use. That's fine. And there's also an in-depth training course that I offer online. So please remember to go and have a look at that, because this covers this stuff plus an awful lot more, because there are layers and layers to being really successful in sales. And what I'm dealing with are the kind of top layer things, the top level things, where you can apply them immediately and see an immediate change in your results. But we can dive a lot deeper too. So what's the framework? I'm going to give you 5 questions that I suggest you write down and you start using if you're not using them already. So the first one is, what's happening today that made you take this call, if you've called them? Or another way of asking this is, what's happening today that has resulted in us having this conversation? Again, coming from the point of view or the standpoint that they are busy people. They don't want to talk to salespeople because salespeople are always trying to sell them things, obviously. But a lot of people's fear about salespeople is that they're trying to exploit them somehow. And this is important to take on board. And I think the reason for that is most of us have the experience of dealing with bad salespeople, where we feel they don't really care about how we get along, what our outcomes are. They're just really interested in selling whatever it is they're selling. So you need to differentiate from that. So the first question, just to repeat it, is, what's happening today that made you take this call? Second one is, what have you already tried? So here we're starting to go in a little bit deeper and explore just exactly where they're at. Now, they might. It's also a way of measuring commitment, because they've already tried several things and it hasn't worked. That's demonstrated that they are prepared to take action and they are really actively trying to solve this problem. If they haven't tried anything yet, that doesn't mean they're not serious. And it can be a good thing, because you might be the first person they've spoken to about it. So from that perspective, the field's all yours. Equally, if they have tried other things, they haven't worked, you might be that breath of fresh air that suddenly it looks like you can provide a solution. So whatever the answer is to this, there are clear advantages for you if you use them properly. Now, the next one is really important, and that question is, what happens if nothing changes? So this is where you start to stack the pain. Clearly, if you are at this point where they're having a conversation, particularly if they have approached you in whatever way, they are feeling sufficient pain around this issue that they are now taking active action. They're not just passively looking or fact-finding on Google or whatever. They are actually taking steps to resolve this problem. And that means that if they don't resolve this problem, that pain is going to build. So it's really important to get clear on what happens if nothing changes. Fourth question, how is this affecting you, or how is this affecting the team personally, or how is this affecting your business? Again, this is diving in a bit deeper into what are the results of this problem as they are being experienced right now. And we know that if this problem isn't solved, the impact of not solving this problem is going to get worse. Things are likely to get worse. So the more you can get clear on that, these are really important points. So if you're clear on what the effect is, and as you make it to them personally as well, you're starting to uncover their personal pain points as well as what might be painful to the business. And then finally, get them focused on the outcomes. So the technique we use here is to basically identify the fears and the pain, stack the pain, and then show them the outcome. So you get them to, it's actually important to get them to feel the pain. It might not sound like a nice thing to do, but this is really important. So the final question is to ask, what would success actually look like in 6 months? Or how would you know that you've resolved this problem? What are the measurable items here? What are the metrics that define success? So phrase that in a way that is appropriate for what you're doing, but you need to have them visualize and be clear on what a successful outcome is so that you know what you have to deliver, and also they can start to experience emotionally what resolving that problem will feel like. And this is all part of driving the emotional motivation to take action and to go with you. Right, so having given you some questions to ask, what are the mistakes to avoid? So the first one is turning this discovery conversation into an interrogation. Discovery is really important for, particularly if you're doing this on the phone before an initial face-to-face meeting where you'll go in, and maybe a demonstration as well. So whatever your next step is in your sales process, the discovery call is about getting clear on the problem, the pain points, the drivers, how you can move things forward. Is this sale likely to happen in a week, in 6 months, in a year? All of these things so that you're qualifying not only the problem from the perspective of can you solve this problem, but as I've spoken about before in other podcasts, you have limited time, so you need to prioritize who you're spending time with. So going through this process is a really important way of prioritizing where this particular client needs to go in terms of what you're doing this week, this month, this quarter, in order to meet your business goals, because obviously we're doing this to stay in business, hopefully, keep a job, whatever it is. So don't turn discovery into interrogation. Get very clear on the questions that you're going to ask in this phase and what you need to come away with. And once you've got clear on those questions and you've got answers that are basically go, no go. So in other words, you need to be getting green lights that this is worth spending your time with, that you can provide a good solution. So don't be afraid of qualifying people out if you cannot provide a good solution or they're looking really iffy whether or not you can close this deal. So qualification is as much about qualifying whether this is worth your time or not, as well as moving this sale on. So don't make it an interrogation and don't jump into a solution too early. So you really want to get clear on this point. And I would suggest that you really minimize the selling at this stage. Find out how they want to proceed. You really want to get a face-to-face meeting where you've got quality time with them, where you can go through in more detail. And there's a whole process to having a really effective meeting, but you want to do that. And I wouldn't do it on the discovery call unless there's a really pressing reason to do so. So the next big mistake that people make is not listening. And what I mean by that is that the client says something and you immediately think, oh, yeah, we can do that. And if I provide this solution with these options, that's going to be an absolutely perfect fit. All the time that you're doing that in your head, you are not listening to the client. So, and this is also waiting to speak. So you get that idea and they're still talking. So you're just kind of waiting for them to stop, to take a breath so you can come in with what you've just been thinking about. But of course, what's happening in that whole period is you're not really listening to what they're saying. So you've got to be listening to everything. By all means, jot things down or ask them to just ask them to pause for a moment. You say, I've just, if you don't mind pausing for a moment, there, it's really important what you're saying. I've just had a thought. I just want to make it, jot it down so I don't forget it. And then please carry on, something like that. But do make sure you are listening all the time, because it's a really simple thing, but this is, I don't know if it's the number one mistake, but it's definitely up there. This is what poor salespeople do. They don't listen to the client and they end up trying to sell something that's a really bad fit. And then finally, ignoring emotional signals. So I'm a big favor of face-to-face meetings. And one of the reasons is you get all the emotional, all the non-verbal communication comes through. And that's where you can see and feel where things are really emotional. And that is such important information. So communication is more than just words. And this is important, understanding where the emotional parts are. If you can't get a face-to-face in the meeting, in the room with somebody meeting, then do a telephone call or a video call, but where you're listening to their voice, because we give away a lot of emotion in our voices. And that's why that is really important. If you are trying to do this by email, that is a major mistake. So if you are not actually talking to people, you are missing a huge amount of what's contained in person-to-person communication. And what's contained in that communication can give you the edge. It will help you to identify what the really important things are. Okay, so that's pretty much it for this podcast. So I wanted to, it kind of completes this loop of 8. So if you haven't listened to them, I suggest that you do, because we start with, in fact, why sales careers stall and how to stay ahead. And then we go through confidence, 7 skills that can predict sales success, and that's long before you get results. 5 buying signals that most salespeople miss, how high performance structure their week, which is really important because certainly poor salespeople tend not to structure their week, and that's a massive mistake. Why really good salespeople rarely get objections. And again, in the course, there's a whole process that I take you through that all but eliminates objections. And if you should get one, you actually already have the answer to it, and that's provided by the client. And then why most deals are won after the meeting. So I'm kind of concluding this with pretty much going back to the beginning of at least the sales cycle where you're having that initial call. But as I've said, this is really important. And if you do this right, it doesn't mean that every call you're going to have will result in a sale, but it does mean that the people you spend time with are the ones you're most likely to get a sale from. And that's really, really important. Okay, so remember that discovery isn't a stage, it's the foundation of the entire sales process. So if you get this right, you're in a really strong position that with the conversations, the clients you go forward with, that's much more likely to result in an order. And things like your conversion rates. So hopefully you do know your conversion rates and you're measuring them. I'm sure a lot of people aren't, but this is another thing that's really important. But you'll notice your conversion rates get much, much better. So I'm going to go through in the next podcast. So that'll be out on Monday. And I'm going to dive a bit deeper into this particular subject. So I've given you a fair bit of information you can apply anyway, but the next podcast is just going to build on this. And the reason for this is quite simple, that discovery calls, I think, are vital. And I've already said it. They're really important for making sure that you identify very quickly what the problems are for any particular client. Once you've identified that, you know whether or not you're a good fit. And if you're not a good fit, my suggestion is always to say it up front, and then the ball's in their court. They may decide that they want to go with you anyway, and again, document things. So I always I like to send an email once I've had a conversation with someone just to confirm what was discussed. Then I've got a record of it. I can, show that they've had it too. Occasionally, very rarely, I've had issues where somebody's ended up with the wrong thing, and I've been able to go back and say, well, I told you that, and here's the the conversation and the email sequence that we had, where we went through all of that. So all these kind of things, I have to stress, I think I've had this once in like decades of sales work, so it's really rare. But if you can really clearly identify who the people are that are a really good fit, they're the ones you want to spend time with. You also look at the timeframes they're working to. So, and again, have a conversation with them about how you move things forward. That means you can prioritize them in not only in terms of the size of the deal, which is obviously a big factor, but how quickly it's likely to move forward. And you can identify the steps very quickly that you have to take to bring this deal to a close and when they need to happen. So all of this helps with planning so that you are spending the majority of your time with people who are most likely to buy from you. So you're going to spend time in discovery where they may or may not be good prospects for you, but you, as I said, you need to get rid of them, qualify them out, and then it's a case of prioritizing so that you are really focused on the most important deals that are going through. Right, that is it from me. So thanks for your time. Please remember to give me a like, subscribe, give me a comment. If you've got any thoughts, suggestions, anything you'd like me to cover, please let me know. And good luck with your selling. So I'll speak to you next time. Have a great week. Bye for now. If you found this podcast useful and hopefully it's got you thinking, please sign up to my mailing list. There's a link in the description where you can just sign up and I'll keep you informed of what's going on. There's also a link to a free 1-hour webinar. It's an on-demand webinar and I'll take you through 3 things you can do right now to improve your sales confidence, and that includes handling objections and closing the sale. So please check out the links and please join the mailing list, and I'll speak to you next time.